of initiations, if you want to use that word, or it's not really properly set ordinations, because this is really reserved for people who are becoming monks and nuns, but they're initiations into deeper levels of commitment and spiritual practice. And the thing to note here is, in this chapter in particular, he goes through a lot of conventional forms or practices that we usually think of in very sort of out there external ways, and he reanimates them or recasts them through the inside out. In other words, he takes them right back to the essential nature, and he keeps calling them, this is the essential nature bowing, this is the essential nature repentance, this is the essential nature taking refuge, and so forth. And if you note, I think so far he's done this with most of the standard practices. I'm trying to think. He does it with meditation. Have we gotten to the meditation chapters yet? Let's see. Yeah, he does it with meditation, and he does it with bowing and repentances. Those are two major things. He does it with the paramita of giving, of charity and donations. He takes that back. He then does it with taking refuge. He does it with the precepts, and he'll do it again with the precepts. And then he's just done it with the four great vows of a bodhisattva. That was on page 56. Every one of these practices or forms, he's retranslated or brought back to a new life by saying all of this is within you, all of this is meant to be taken within you and cultivated, all of this manifests through your own essential nature. There's nothing outside of this. So all of these teaching, all these Dharma doors, even the sutra texts themselves, are merely meant to be, I guess poetically you'd say, mirrors. And I used that passage last week. It's mirrors within which you discover your own essential nature again and again. They're reflective, and they're meant that when you're cultivating in this manner, these practices, even the icons themselves, and what he'll go into tonight, the bodies, are meant to return the light back into one's own nature, to light up your own mind and heart, that allows you to see this, the essential Buddha of your own nature. So it's a really direct and powerful teaching. So tonight we're going to start on 59, because he's going to go into a rather seemingly complex or difficult topic that I myself have over the years tried to wrap my mind around, and he really helped me see it in a different light. But it has to do with what are called the three body theories, the three body theory of the Buddha, or of Buddhism. And it starts, he says, good and wise and friends. We're at the top of page 59, and he basically finishes with, take refuge with your own Buddha, not with some other Buddha. If you don't return to the Buddha within, there's nothing you can rely on. So that's a very strong phrase. And then he says the three treasures of your own mind, which he says Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, are what is awakened, what is right and true, and the last one, what is pure. And this, he says, is to take refuge with yourself. Now, be clear here, when he's saying take refuge with yourself, he's not saying it in some kind of, egotistic or narcissistic way. Take refuge with yourself. He's saying take refuge with your true self. And that's not the ordinary self that we're usually thinking of, but it's a deeper spiritual self. But when I say spiritual, I don't mean it doesn't have body. It means it's more awakened and alert and informed and clear, and not muddy or murky or even venal or petty. It's really the profoundness of the human. And he says that's where you want to set your sights, that's what your compass should be. So when you take refuge with yourself, and he means by this even your ordinary self, which is not that, okay, or mine isn't, enlightened, awakened, clear, pure Buddha, he's saying, but that's your potential. So if you take refuge with yourself, you're returning to that place to cultivate it, to refine it, to realize it. Don't look anyplace else for this Buddha. It comes right through the perfection of your own humanity. That's his teaching here. So it's a different sense of self, but it's saying, here's where you need to attend. And even when he says, remember before there was the the verse competition between Shensho and Hui Neng, and Shensho lost the first round. Actually, he kind of lost every round, but he lost the first round. At the end of losing the first round, the teacher didn't embarrass him publicly. He waited to talk to him privately. What did he say to him, though, about his verse?
You haven't realized the way yet.
Yeah, you haven't realized the way, but specifically he says you haven't seen your nature. Yeah, you haven't seen your nature. Now you remember it, huh? But you could translate this. It's jian xing, which means see the nature or seeing the nature. And I would prefer to go this way with it. Just like I don't like to use enlightenment because it sounds like an attained accomplishment. I'm enlightened. Okay, all the work's done. Boom. Use awakening, which is something that's organic, dynamic, going on all the time. He says thought after thought, if you're clear and awakened, thought after thought, that's Buddha. It's not like you have one thought and that's it. So it's an organic, dynamic process. I think seeing the nature is the same way. He means look to your nature, consider yourself, your life, your situation. Always be looking to the ground that you're supposed to be cultivating. That's what it means to be seeing the nature, not I've seen the nature. And so it's like, where do you put your attention? You are looking at your essential nature, not outside for some other source of power or some source of liberation. So I would translate it as seeing one's nature, and that takes place at all times. Walking, standing, sitting, even in lying down in sleep. It's a constant attention to your own conditions, your own body and mind, your own feelings and emotions. That's the ground of awakening. That's the Bodhimanda. So this is a very different approach, and I like seeing the nature because it's sort of like, what am I regarding? Day to day, moment to moment, what is my reference point? What's my frame of reference? And often we check ourselves and find out I'm looking outside a lot, either for something that's coming to me, perceived through my seeking, or aversion to put off what's threatening me. But my frame of reference is, or blaming somebody else for this, and so forth. But the frame of reference here is returning that light to examine oneself, to illumine oneself, to take stock of oneself. I think seeing the nature can be translated better that way. So he says then, he starts, now that you've taken refuge with the three treasures of your own nature, each and every one listen carefully as I explain for you the Buddha of your own inherent nature as a single essence with three bodies. Now this series of paragraphs here is really important because he's actually now taking what we call Buddha or the Buddha and saying that in fact is the ground of our being, of every one of us, not like special people or sages or bodhisattvas, but every living being's basic ground. I don't know if you want to use it as ontology, but what he's saying is the essence of what it means to be a human, to be a living being, is to have a Buddha essence and a pure potential for awakening. And that's why I want to explain to you the Buddha of your own inherent nature. And he says, then it's a single essence with three bodies. This will enable you to discern the three bodies and completely awaken to your inherent nature by yourself. Then he goes, follow me and saying. So he has them then not chant, but say what he's saying. I repeat after me, and what they're doing is they're making a commitment, and the commitment is such. And he goes through three things here. I take refuge with the pure Dharma body within my own body. I take refuge with the perfect, complete reward body within my own body. I take refuge with the hundreds of thousands of myriad transformed bodies within my own body. So those are the three. Now, he doesn't say, I take refuge with the pure Dharma body. I take refuge with the perfect, complete reward body, or refuge with the myriad transformation bodies. But he adds that little phrase at the end, within my own body, within my own person. That's very interesting. Because I always imagine these to be almost ethereal, out there, divinity embodiments, or not even embodiments, disembodiments. And what's interesting about what he's saying here is that actually, and I had a discussion with somebody the other day, and I said, well, why are you studying Buddhism? Tien, birth and death. I said, okay. What does that mean? It means end, birth, and death. Like you don't exist anymore? Whoa. Yeah, well, you want that? Well, well, that's what I've been taught. And I said, well, think about it. What does it mean to end birth and death? It means, you're like extinct like a dinosaur? Or who would want to strive for that? And she was like, oh, I never thought about it. I just keep saying that every day. So I want to propose something here. He's saying, and the text is saying, and other texts say, that the Buddha has 3 embodiments. A Buddha, not the Buddha, a Buddha. Any fully awakened, perfectly enlightened being has 3 embodiments. Well, that doesn't mean disembodied. And it doesn't mean extinct. So whatever resolving the question of birth and death means, it doesn't mean you go into nihilistic void and it's all gone. If anything, it's probably differently embodied rather than disembodied. And I don't think existence ceases, because clearly, if there's bodies, they exist. Duh, this is okay. But they exist differently than something before. So this is really important, because if we want to think about nirvana and Buddha as some sort of extinction of consciousness and existence itself, who would strive for that? Most of us are afraid that that's what's waiting for us. So rather than think that that's some kind of escape from suffering, I think what this is saying is there's not void disembodiment or extinction, but rather a differently embodied existence. And the existence itself is different. It doesn't cease. It just ceases to be suffering. Wow. So now we have a different vision, I think, of the Buddha and the bodies and what he's saying here. So the Dharma body, and we put the Sanskrit Dharmakaya, is generally refers to sort of the ideal abstract Buddha awakening. But it also means one's inherent nature, which doesn't come or go, it's not produced and not destroyed. So it's referring to one's innate potential for Buddhahood that's always present, always available, even if not realized. And so the Dharma body is that which doesn't come or go. It's kind of like in the Avatamsaka, where it describes a Buddha awakened state where it says coming and going without a border. In other words, once one is in this state, one comes into embodiment and changes embodiment and goes through a multitude, but something stays constant in that process. And it's not associated with loss or grieving or attachment. There's a kind of a freedom of coming and going without border. So I take refuge in the Dharma body. Now, this also means, and I'm going to quote a passage of text, the Dharma is something that's considered to be eternally abiding. It always remains true. But what that Dharma is, we'll go into a different class completely. But it's the unchanging truth of things. Let's say it's that way. And that doesn't come and go. That's just there. The Buddha once said that when somebody realizes things as they really are, and then they're able to transmit that both in writing, in their words, and in their life, that is the maintenance of the Dharma body. Now, that's very interesting. So the Dharma body exists even after a teacher, a sage passes, because one, they have embodied it so fully that the sort of the radiant the radiant inspiration continues into the bodies of others. You remember that sage or teacher, and it continues to feed and support you, and it goes on through the next generation.
Like this?
And this text itself, let me quote you, this is from a sutra. If from this time on, this is the Buddha as he's passing, he says to his disciples, if from this time on, my disciples transmit my teachings and practice them, transmit these teachings, I mean the awakened teachings, and practice them. This is the other part. You can talk all you want about it, but that's not transmitting. The transmission is embodiment. How do there's an expression? You can speak wonderfully, you can speak well. If you don't practice, it's not the way. So it's this idea. If they transmit these teachings and embody them, then the Dharma body of the Tathagata is always existing and never extinct. Wow. So the Buddha is saying here, if you keep these teachings going, and if you embody them, that is the Dharma body of the Buddha. It's not an individual's body, but it's a teaching and an embodiment of truth that keeps going. Wow. So that's the Dharma body. And in a sense, it's really... Well, the Sixth Patriarch here, he says, this isn't mine, I'm just passing on. Remember, this is not my teaching. This is something I just realized and inherited, and I keep it going. And he says to you, because I care, won't you all do the same for me? Keep this going. Like a seed, you keep passing it on. And so it never extinguishes unless, one, people don't actually cultivate and practice it. That's the first strike. Because you don't see it. We learn by seeing, we learn by watching, we learn virtue and goodness by seeing it embodied. If it's not embodied, where do you find it? Sure, it's in the depths of your being, but it doesn't get reinforced, it doesn't get kindled, it doesn't get matured. But you also can see it or feel it or remember it through teachings, through text, through images, through icons, through art. This all has the effect. I was thinking of... this is sounding world transcending, but I was just thinking of one of my favorite poets, E.E. Cummings. I don't know if any of you read E.E. Cummings. He never used capitals in his poems or his names, so his name is E small e Cummings small. I have to figure out why he did that, but I had something to do with reducing his ego. But anyhow, E.E. Cummings, wonderful poet. I would encourage you to read him. But he said of himself, he said, when I was young, my whole consciousness was I was the child of my parents. I was the child of my parents. What mommy and daddy did or wanted or cared for me and whatnot, my whole world revolved around them. As I grew up, I became a poet writing poems. That's what my consciousness was. But as I neared the end of my life, I just became my poems. And it's an interesting sort of thing. So somehow his embodiment moved to the level of his poems. And he didn't even regard his physical body per se, or even his identity as a poet as the core of his essence, but what he was generating, creating. And at that point, he says, basically it was coming through me, not from me. So he was in some line of inspired transmission of something that goes beyond us as individuals. So you could look at the Dharmakaya in that way. The second one, the perfect complete reward body, is a little harder because it's more subtle, and it has to do with, it's sometimes called the enjoyment body. I don't know if we have that there. Yeah, reward or enjoyment. It means, basically, it's a refined state of spiritual presence that comes from the result of cultivating virtue and goodness and the pursuit of truth. And this is something that's somewhat radiant. And not everybody sees this, and that's why it is a manifested form, but it's not manifest to everybody. Not everybody can see this body. For example, I do imagine, and I know it's true, the Buddha was said to have and be able to manifest this reward body. And sometimes when individuals saw it, they were moved to tears without him ever saying anything. And other people go like, what? What did you see? They didn't see it. So the seeing of this particular body has to do with causes and conditions that are reciprocal between the teacher, the sage, and the student and disciple. The way I think of it sometimes is I think of tuning forks. So if there's a C tuning fork in a room, and you hit one, all the others vibrate. The D's won't vibrate to the C. And I think it's the same way. That's why the Avatamsaka says, at the same assembly, at the same time, in the same place when the Buddha spoke, people heard and saw different things. Why? So it's a combination of what the Buddha was able to manifest and what they were able to pick up on. So sometimes you can see this in different forms. A The one I think of that I like best of all is Sudana, good wealth, the pure youth good wealth, when he goes on his spiritual pilgrimage. He goes to see all these great teachers, and when he sees them, he gives these descriptions, and man, they're like far out. This teacher emits lights and radiance, and these flowers flying all over, and the fragrance coming off the body, and everything, and I'm moved to tears, and he's bowing and everything. I don't think I would see that necessarily. But he sees it because he's pure. He's a pure youth who's seeking the way, and he sees something there that most of us would pass by. He even takes, there's bandits and prostitutes and so forth that become his teachers, but he sees past that to see this reward body, that they're just manifesting this in a particular realm. It's what's appropriate at that time to teach and transform. Some people say Amitabha Buddha is a classic example of the reward body. In other words, through the vows and cultivation, creates a pure land place that's a reward both for his or her own efforts, but also a place that people can go back and return to at some point. So that's sort of the idea of the reward body. But it is very subtle and not everybody sees it. The last one is really interesting. These are the classic ones I'm giving you. I'm not going into Hui Neng yet. Hui Neng's going to say this is all within you. Whoa, wait. But let's go. Yeah, take refuge with the myriad transformations. Sometimes these are also, this is Nirmanakaya. Sometimes this translates manifest bodies. And what this means is these are different embodiments that an enlightened being can take on or project or assume in different ways, in different forms, as appropriate to teach and transform and liberate people. So the classic example of this would be? Yeah, Guanyin Bodhisattva. Okay, this is very interesting. Guanyin Bodhisattva, you read the text, was an accomplished Buddha, who then, accomplishing Buddha, made this vow to sort of return in the path of the Bodhisattva, manifesting hundreds of thousands of forms. That's why when you see the Guanyin image, you see the image and then you see all these hands going out, 1,000 hands. And in each hand there's an eye with 1,000 eyes. And you're like, weird, what is this, some mutant genetic? No, it is actually a symbolic presentation of the compassionate responsiveness to the different conditions of people and living beings that this manifests. So 1,000 eyes, 1,000 hands have different ways of reaching out and supporting living beings in different ways. And if you look at the Buddha, you look at Guanyin further and you read the text, you see Guanyin can appear in this form as a man, as a woman, as a boy, as a girl, as an animal, as a god, as a beggar. And there's many stories of people who encounter this transformative being, don't realize at the time, but the marker is something changes in you. Something is turned by this encounter. Sometimes they rescue and save. Sometimes they come to aid. Sometimes they scold the dickens. Sometimes they scare you. And so I always like this because if you look at the Guanyin image at the city of 10,000 Buddhas, it's really cool. You see the 1,000 hands, 1,000 eyes, and there's these heads coming off the top, and they're all like really pretty. And you go to the back, and it's like, whoa, Halloween. Because you see all these other heads, faces, and that's the taming and subduing one. So sometimes, to be liberated, we have to be scared. Sorry, it's not like, oh, come be liberated, here's some candy. Sometimes we have to have a kind of like a wake-up call. I would imagine that sometimes this bodhisattva could manifest as death. Because death is a very powerful transformative presence that can cause us to turn around. What's interesting, it gets even wilder, I wouldn't say wilder, but more interesting. In the Earth Store Sutra, it talks about how bodhisattvas, Buddhas and bodhisattvas who are using transformed bodies can even manifest as nature, as dimensions of nature. And the one that's given in Earth Store that I really like is this, it's a pure mountain lake in a meadow. And those who behold it not only get water from the lake, but are inspired to return to purity, to return to their own nature. There's something so clear and cleansing about it, it causes that. So when we say inspire, it's literally to take in, to breathe in this energy, and it can have a transformative effect. So I had never imagined until I read the Earth Store Sutra that, wow, so these inspirational vistas or moments out in nature could in fact be manifestations of this spiritual energy, teaching and transforming. Really curious. I had a moment like this. I won't say it was a bodhisattva, but the effect was clearly inspirational. I used to spend a lot of time solo backpacking in the Rockies or the Sierras, and once I was solo backpacking in winter in the Sierras, snowshoeing, which is really fun. Well, fun in the sense if you snowshoe, you go slowly. Anybody ever snowshoe? I don't mean you walked out in the snow with your shoes and you put on these big snowshoes and you go trumping through the woods. You have?
I've seen it in movies, like Mickey Mouse. Like,
You saw it in the movies, okay.
His racket to his shoes.
Yeah. You should try it in real life, not the movies. But anyhow, so you're out snowshoeing. The reason I say it's cool is when you ski, you make all this noise. And everything of interest runs away. But when you snowshoe, you're so quiet. All of a sudden you see all these birds and animals you never see, like bobcats and wolverines and so forth. So I was snowshoeing, and then suddenly this blizzard came. Really heavy-duty blizzard. And I knew I couldn't make it back to my base camp because it was too far away, and I knew if I kept going, I'd get lost, and then there was a danger of just vanishing in the snowstorm blizzard. So I remembered something from one of my Boy Scout manuals or whatever. So I took the snowshoe, and there was a steep side of a hill, and I just dug out a cavern, a cave in the snow. So there was a little cave, just covering me like this. And then I had a little pad I could sit on, and I just went in there, and eventually the snow just kept coming, and it completely encased me in there, like it was a caterpillar in a cocoon, right? And I just kind of okay, just sit here. So I sat there. I didn't really know how to meditate then, but I just sat there and kind of just got quiet. And it was and snowing. I don't know how much time passed because I didn't have a watch. And finally, I didn't hear any more wind. Everything was really quiet. And of course, I was but I was warm. It was really interesting. I wasn't cold because the heat from my body inside the snow kept me warm. And so then I took my snowshoe and I broke open the window of snow in front of me. And when I looked out, I was absolutely stunned because the sun had come out and the whole mountainside, the whole mountain place was just covered in this glistening snow, sparkling just like diamonds. It was like, wow, and there wasn't a sound. It was so quiet. It was soundless. It was just pure diamond-like snow for as far as I could see. And it kind of moved me to tears, but the tears were kind of like I felt I wanted to return to that purity in my own life, the purity that struck me there. I wanted to have that in my life again. And also a kind of sadness that I'd let myself get so far away from something like that. It was both real and symbolic at the same time. It was like inner and outer at the same time. And I actually made that resolve there that I would go then to find a teacher who could teach me how to cultivate and to teach me how to get back to my own purity. So was that a bodhisattva? I don't know. But the effect it had on me was transformative. And so sometimes things like this, and maybe you all have had experiences. Sometimes it's a proximity to a pure nature experience. And I think, this is the value of wilderness. It's the value of pristine places away, that they can actually rekindle in us our memory of our own nature in this way. So anyhow, that's a story. So then he goes on, and there's this one line here, and it's like bang, over the head. Here he goes. Good and wise friends, a physical body is an inn you cannot return to or rely on. How did that slip in there? And so I think what he's saying here, although the enlightened body, these three bodies manifest in and through a physical body, they are not attached to or clinging to or identified with it. It is a vehicle that's being used. That's why coming and going without border means something continues through, as opposed to this is me, this is mine, well, I will make it last forever, or fight its decay, and then we get attached to the physical body, basically saying the physical body is an inn, it's a hotel room to which we can't return and rely on. I've been there, you've been there, people have been there before. We come and go through that. So in a sense, he's doing a little wake up here. He's saying, I am not talking about your current sense of your physical body, which is a conditioned Dharma that has a time that it's coming into being, it gets old, it gets sick, and then it passes away. That's the physical body, that's the in. But he's saying something here that it's like, wow, so that means you could have many bodies, and you could come and go in these many bodies without being in samsara, that you could actually come and go in nirvana through many bodies, many manifestations. This is very interesting. It's a kind of really profound sense of freedom, that if you are unattached and unclinging, something continues, something goes on. I'm not going to try to hint what that is and say, oh, it's this or that, or it's a soul. It's not saying that, but he's just saying, with an unattached, liberated mind, you can come and go through, and you can manifest these bodies. And that's what nirvana means. It's very interesting. So I think, when he says the physical body is an in you can't return to, he's sort of doing a wake-up call. Don't put your effort here. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about using that physical body to cultivate a different embodiment. So this passage becomes extremely important here. Okay. Now he goes on, he says, these three bodies exist within our nature. All people of this world have them. Here's the universal, if you want to say, equality of Buddhahood. But because they are confused and do not see their inner nature, they seek externally for the Tathagata's bodies. They do not realize that they have the three bodies of the Buddha within their own bodies. So now he's saying, while this is true, we seldom really wake up to it. We seldom really access it. It's there, but we don't see it. Sometimes we get glimpses of it, then we forget. Or confusion covers us over. Her habit energy takes over. This is a common theme through the text. It's not that it's in there for some people and not for others. It's universally there, but not everybody finds it accessible. Not everybody pays attention to it. Or not everybody nurtures it. All these things, it's sort of like, and so, it's this idea of how do you return to and nurture your deep spiritual nature? Well, first of all, there'd have to be some recognition that it's there. Then there'd have to be some commitment to do it. And then overcoming the obstacles and resistance to not doing it, which often seem like being successful and concerned and busy. So it's really tricky, because if you're going with the physical in-body, you can put a lot of time and energy into that one. You can lift weights, eat organic food, blah, 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 and even have surgeries and, da-da-da, and you just keep working on it, and it still gets flabby, old, and falls apart. And it's really like bad investment, But it's so ironic, and yet we do this. We do this, and we don't really, then we neglect what he's calling this inner, the inner nature. We neglect the inner nature for the externals, the superficials. This is what he means to be caught up in appearances. When he says our teaching is beyond freedom from appearances, it means we are not attached to and identifying with the passing, fleeting phenomena. We're tuning into this deeper sound of the inner nature, and that's where we're coming from. That's what we're attending to. That's the compass. That's what we steer by. Confucius says, in a similar way, the person who has this sense never leaves it for an instant. Never forgets this, even for an instant, no matter what the conversation, what the exchange, no matter what the temptation or the threat. That person stays anchored in that being, that centeredness of being. Never leaves it for an instant. Wow. So here's the same sort of thing he's saying, but he's explaining why it wouldn't be the same in everybody, why it's manifest differently, because confused and do not see. You should all listen to what I'm saying, and we're going on, for it will allow you to recognize that right within your own body, your own nature is replete with the three bodies of a Buddha. These three bodies arise from your essential nature. They do not come from the outside. So there's nothing, in a sense, to seek. Even if you say, well, we're praying, but what you're praying for is the opening and awakening to your own nature. And the prayer, in a sense, is really not so much seeking external assistance or aid, but really sort of a reminder, a recall. So when you think of when people recite the Buddha's name, are they praying? Well, actually, no, they're recalling their own nature. It's a recall. So it's calling on the Buddha within, sort of reclaiming the inherent Buddha nature. And the external device of reciting the Buddha's name is just a kind of expedient, a provisional inducement to get your mind focused on this inner nature. So the real recitation of the Buddha's name is not to seek liberation or salvation in another power, but to use that focused concentration recitation to awaken your own Buddha nature, and he says to build your own Pure Land within your own being. So this goes back to what he said earlier, remember in the exchange with Emperor Yang. As the mind is purified, the Buddha land is purified. Wow. Okay. So, what is the pure Dharma body? Buddha? People's essential nature is basically pure, and from it the 10,000 things are created. So now he's giving you the dynamic, the mechanism. Thoughts of evil give birth to evil deeds. And you can follow this through. So this is it. Impulses, feelings, thoughts, inclinations, habits towards what is not right, then result in actions. These actions, intentional actions, are called karma. And this karma then in turn sets in reverberations that come back as a ripening and a fruit. So here he's taking out a series of, if you do not guard, watch, cultivate, stay on top of these thoughts, feelings, and impulses, they will lead to actions of body, of speech, or even ideas, imaginings. They have effects, and those effects then rebound. Conversely, thoughts of goodness give rise to wholesome deeds, and the opposite happens. Thus it is that all dharmas come to be from this essential nature. This is interesting. He's not saying it's just good. He's saying it has the potential for either way. This nature, when he says the 10,000 things come from it, it means Buddhas come from it, so do demons. What? Whoa. No, I thought the demons are outside and the Buddhas are... No. Whatever you do with this nature, if you use it this way, it turns into enlightenment and awakening. If you misuse it and abuse it, it turns into something else. But it is dynamic and it is functioning. So this is not like it's fixed and say, oh, the Buddha says human nature is good. No. It can go good and it can go the other way, depending on how you use it. Yes?
So when he says basically pure, would a Western conception of tabula rasa fix that?
Western conception of what?
Blank slate, right?
Tabula rasa? I think what he's saying is, when he's saying that, where were you reading? Essential nature is basically pure. So this goes back to his rendering early. He said, when he means basically pure, before the thoughts and impulses move to direct it one way or another, it has a basic wholeness and completeness to it. By what he means pure, needing nothing. Okay, complete. That's why he says how unexpected. The nature is already pure, whole, and complete. It lacks nothing. So pure means everything is whole there. Now, depending on how you work or use that, you can go two different ways. But pure doesn't mean it's not capable of going either way. It just means it's whole and complete, lacking nothing. Now, what are you going to do? If you stay within that state, do not turn and get turned by states. Do not move off that. You always stay within the nature. And he says that is, in fact, thought after thought, that is Buddhahood. If you turn and move, then you're setting in motion something that has effects and so forth. But the basic wholeness of the nature is still there. You've just now transformed it. So that's where he's going. He says, thus it is that all dharmas come from this essential nature. It's like, now this he gives an analogy. It's like the sky above, which is always clear, and the sun and moon, which are forever bright. Even if they are obscured by floating clouds that overshadow the world below in darkness, the sky above remains clear. If a wind suddenly comes up scattering the clouds, then above and below are both bright, and everything reappears and becomes visible. The tendency of people is to constantly drift like the clouds in the sky. So now he's giving an analogy. He's saying, let's say the inherent nature, the true mind, is like the sun and moon. Okay, let's say one's the other. Right now, they're there, and they're always there. Now, sometimes you don't see the moon because it's located on the other side. Sometimes it's blocked by the Earth, but it's still there. And the sun is always there. But clouds can come, and you don't see the sun, and you think the sun's not there. But it is still there. He's saying the nature is the same way. The clouds are the confusion, the movement of thoughts, the murkiness that come in and obscure, to the point where if you're enveloped in that fog and cloud so much, you think that's in fact what it is. Sometimes in where I grew up in Wisconsin, you can go 200 some days without sun. I mean, it's every day you get up and it's cloudy, overcast, gray, and dismal. People there get what's called SAD, seasonal affective disorder. They get actually depressed because there's no sunlight. And then that leads to drinking and blah, blah, blah. And then when the sun finally comes up, you go, oh my gosh, I thought it was completely gone. You get all excited because the sun's there. And people in California, what is wrong with these people? Because here, you basically, hardly a day goes by, you don't see the sun here. And sometimes it's the opposite. Days and days go by and you don't have any clouds. That isn't to say California's enlightened, Wisconsin isn't. I'm just pointing this out, okay? But his metaphor, his analogy here is to talk about the constancy of the sun and moon as the nature. The clouds is the confused mind being turned and moving and seemingly obscures the sun. But he said, if the clouds are gone, if the afflictions are gone, if klesha are gone, then once again, it's non-dual, one and the same. Up above and below, it's one and the same. In the same way, we can get clouded over. We can forget this original nature. Okay, let me just say a little bit about this because I think there's two dimensions to this. One dimension to this is, in a very ordinary worldly sense, we forget what's important. We forget what's important, and we get really busy. And then moments come, we remember what's important, and we sort of celebrate that, and then we lose it again. Now, in the sense here, he's saying on the spiritual side, it's our Buddha nature that's important. This is what we need to nurture and pay attention to. This is our life. This is our everything. But we don't always pay attention. Yeah, later. I get older, I'm going to do it. Or maybe I'll go to the retreat next year. Or as soon as I finish making a killing on the market, I'm going to... And so both sides have the same mind behind it, whether it's in a worldly sense or world transcending sense. It's very easy to get confused and let the clouds come over and forget what's important. I'll give you maybe an example from my own life, say with my father. So when my father was a family of a number of kids, but he was the oldest, and so in that family system, the oldest child has primary responsibility for taking care of the parents. It falls to the oldest child. And so after World War II, about the time I was born, my father, they came out of the Depression, they came out of the war, it was time to move on, and he had a friend who was going to start up an aerospace thing in Southern California, because right after World War II, that was the hot industry. It was like Silicon Valley now was aerospace in Southern California, because they had all this war surplus, they had aluminum, and so all this stuff was happening. And with a minimal investment, my father would have gone out and made a lot of money. And he thought to himself, he said, but if I go, who's going to take care of my mother and father? And it's because his mother had been in a car accident and become an invalid, head-on crash, and she lost the use of her legs. And she, much like Doug's mother, ended up taking care of the whole family from a wheelchair. And so my father just felt, not only is it my responsibility, but my younger siblings are really pretty irresponsible. And if I leave, I can tell this isn't going to take place. So he stayed to take care of her. And so then what he did was, well, he couldn't go and make money in California, so he went into a sort of small grocery business. Again, as fate would have it, this is when the supermarkets started to come out. So in the early 50s and so forth, all of a sudden these big supermarkets came and these mom and pop grocery stores were obsolete. They couldn't make a go of it. And so my father said, I'm still not going to move. I'm going to still stay here. What can I do? And the only thing available to him was to become a salesman, a traveling salesman. And so he went out and bought the suits, got the car, and started to become a traveling salesman to not only bring home money for 4 kids, one and then the 3 others, but also to take care of his mother and father. And so we only lived 2 houses away. We could see their house, and they could see our house, which was a double whammy, because a lot of times I didn't get away with things I could have, because she was always looking out the window, catch me doing things. Anyhow, so he was out doing that, and then one night he was in a hotel in Upper Michigan, and this other man was sitting there, and he sat down to join him for dinner, and they began a conversation. The other man said, well, what's your situation? He said, oh, I'm married, I have 4 kids, and da-da-da. And he says, well, what are you doing here? Huh? My father said, well, no. He says, let me tell you a story. I'm married, and I have 3 kids. And I decided I was going to enter this job and make a lot of money. And he said, here I am. I'm now approaching late 50s, early 60s, and I'm making money. He said, but I have lost my kids. Every play, every musical concert, every game, every award, their graduations, I missed it all because I was out here making money on the road. And he said, so here I am alone in this hotel, and the only reason I have you is because you came to join me for dinner. He said it was a big mistake. I didn't have my priorities straight. He said, do not do what I did. He said, how old are your kids? And he said, oh, they're like 2, 4, 6, and 8. He said, go back, no matter what you have to do. And so my father thought about it overnight. He thought, okay, that's right. This guy's right. So he went back. Now it was really tough because there was no work available. This was during the Eisenhower recession. He hadn't been able to go to college because in the Depression, with 12 kids in the family, he didn't have money to go to school. And so he just thought, what can I do to take care of my mother and my kids? And so he got a job in a factory. He hated it. It really broke, it was really hard. It was a noisy factory with presses and welders and things like that. But gradually he adjusted. And I can remember him getting up at 6:30 to go to work, hear him packing his lunch, go off to work. And then he'd come home, and as soon as he'd come home, we'd all go out to greet him, and you could see him light up. He'd start walking. You could see his face light up as we got there. And then usually my mother would pack a picnic lunch or something. We'd go off to some lake or something and do this, and that was sort of his life. And then he attended to his own mother until she died. His last gesture was to feed her favorite ice cream as she was lying in her bed. And so I thought about this, as I was going to college and whatnot, and thought, well, that's a very interesting model. And the funny thing about it was it both inspired me, but I noticed that he was really happy. He was happy in a way that other people I knew weren't. And even while he was on his own deathbed dying, I asked him, did you have any regrets for all of this? And he just looked at me sort of nonplussed, and he said, I've just been so blessed. What are you asking? And he was blessed. He didn't have a fancy car, fancy home, but there he was with his own kids and grandchildren around him in his own house and his own bed as he was dying. And by his measure, he hadn't lost sense of what was important. Now, this is, of course, a worldly story, but I think you can take it, it's sort of like a cautionary tale to be careful what you imitate and where you put your priorities. Because very quickly the time passes and it's over, and what you've invested in doesn't pay anything in the deep sense. So it's the same way at the spiritual path. Once you have a sense of what it is to cultivate towards Buddhahood or enlightenment or whatnot, don't reverse course. Don't get lost and set up another priority or something. And then, because as the Sixth Patriarch says, a frantic passage through life ends with bitter regret. It's one of his key lines from the verse. A frantic passage, a busy passage through life ends with bitter regret. So I just share this with you because it was one of the things that really inspired me about my father, and actually caused me to have filial regard for my own parents, was because they had done that. it somehow worked on me. And I think maybe those feelings, those sentiments are probably the basis of really developing the spiritual. It's not outside of our human relations that the best of us starts to come forth. And at a higher level, when you start to think, well, I can be affiliated with my parents with food and medicine and whatnot, but as they're passing and as they're going, what do I have, to give them for that? And this is really where the impulse for many monks and nuns and enlightened beings comes from, to cultivate the way deeply, because they want to be able to extend a kind of regard and kindness that goes to that space at the point when they're leaving this world, that they have something to offer in the regard of what comes after death. And so it's not just for your own awakening, but there's this compassionate regard to return a kind of kindness in a deeper level. So anyhow, I share that tonight. I was going to read a passage from Mencius, but we're out of time, so maybe I'll read it next week. It's a really, Mencius takes us through the stages of life and sort of tells us how we forget what's important. But apparently that was a problem then too. But I'll stop there tonight. Usually I don't want to burden you with my own stories, but sometimes it's in the specifics of our own lives or somebody else's lives that we can see things that, that matter or not. And so you're all younger than I am, so there's a lot of chance for you to blow the clouds away and figure out what's important and stay with it. Keep your eyes on the prize. Okay. Any announcements?
Tomorrow, 7:30 p.m., we have a lecture by Jim Fosher. He will be talking about the Limitless Life Sutra here. And on Monday, we have the Buddhist for the Modern Mind by Dharma. Jason, do you know the topic for the class?
I should remember,
But my mind's so modern I can't remember anything. Let me check my iPhone.
It's okay. And this is on October 15, we have the grounding session at the City of 10,000 Buddhas. So if you just can go to the grdu.org website, and this is one chance to dispel the clouds.
Not only one chance to dispel the clouds, but it's like, I'll tell you another story about my father later, but a retreat, a 5, 6, 7 day retreat, a spiritual pulling back, can really be a wake up at all the levels we've been talking about tonight. Just take time out to stop and to contemplate quietly. Things naturally start to return. Priorities become clearer, and you come out of that not necessarily awakened, but much clearer about what's important and what isn't. And there's a tendency to think, yeah, they always have those guanyins and those chans, I can always do it. But I would say carpe diem, seize the moment, because you don't know if you'll ever have a chance again. So if you have opportunities and chances to take a spiritual retreat, and I'm not saying just this one, almost in any tradition that has the energy of reflecting within, do it before it's too late. Do not think. My teacher used to say, there's a phrase, don't wait till you're old to cultivate. And then what's the second line? It's something about the little graves are filled with the young. But it's this idea that impermanence can come in any moment, and it's not going to wait for you to say, he would say, oh, King Yama knocks on the door, and you say, oh, excuse me, but I got a retreat I have to go to, I put off, can you wait? King Yama's the ghost of death, And so he says, King Yama doesn't wait. It's called the implacable face of King Yama. You do not negotiate. So, I don't want to scare you or anything, but I want to make it a positive sense that if you're trying to reorient or thinking you might be inclined, when you have an opportunity, grab it. Now, if I told you, by the way, I got a stock thing I know that's coming due, in a week this stock's going to shoot up to like 300%, you'd say, give it to me now, give it to me now, give it to me now. But they say, there's a retreat coming? Oh, yeah, later. So see it as that this is kind of, as Helen Wu used to say, this is deep investment. Deep investment. Okay, we'll do the transference. Yeah.
I would like to express my gratitude to my teacher, you, to share the story with us, to our story. I was so moved and I would like to, from Chinese standard, only the virtuous person and only the most blessed person can die in peace like your father. Like he died at home, and before he died, he said to you that he was so blessed.
Mm-hmm.
So only the virtuous person can die like your father, and I would like to.
Thank you. What I would say to you, what he said to me at the time, I think was like a final teaching, because he knew I was kind of inclined towards many paths, and he was kind of saying, I don't have any regrets. Be careful that you don't either. Yeah. Okay, we'll do the transference. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become